Hello, horrible, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahaminous. We're boys now. So, disgraced R&B star RKelly has been removed from suicide watch in the Brooklyn jail where he's just beginning a 30-year sentence, where he's been sentenced for sex trafficking. So in this video, I'm going to give you some background and insight into RKelly's case. I'm going to mention some of the other celebrity landmark sexual assault predatory kind of cases and how they affected the whole landscape. I'm going to give you a psychoanalysis of the perpetrator, RKelly. So we'll talk about the character traits that encouraged him in his dastardly, deprived acts. And also we'll do a quick exploration of why it took him so long to be prosecuted when there were suspicions about this kind of behaviour for decades. So sit back, grab your pepper spray, and welcome to a Psych for Sore Minds. Right, first a bit of background information. Let's take it back to the Concrete Street original beats with real live MCs. So the 55-year-old, whose real name is Robert Sylvester Kelly, known for the 1996 Grammy-winning hit I Believe I Can Fly, plus his comical kind of breakdown during the interview with Gayle King. He's recently been found guilty of racketeering and trafficking following a high-profile trial in New York in 2021. And he was sentenced very recently, just over a week ago, on the 29th of June. Now, officials from the prison say that he's placed on suicide watch due to the emotional distress of his current situation. And he was actually removed from that suicide watch following a clinical assessment. And Kelly's lawyers confirmed that the singer is no longer on suicide watch, but says that he plans to actually sue the prison with a lawsuit for their actions. I'd like to think when RKelly came out of suicide watch, he said, "I believe I'll be fine." Sorry, too soon. So RKelly is actually suing the Metropolitan Detention Centre, saying that jail officials ordered the watch immediately after his sentence, solely for punitive purposes and because he was a high-profile inmate. Now, oddly, this is very similar to the case of Ghislaine Maxwell. I've actually done a separate video about her, always be plugging, and about her complaining and trying to sue another prison, also in New York, because she was also put on suicide watch. So Kelly was convicted last September, but he was actually sentenced very recently. And prosecutors said that Kelly exploited his stardom and his wealth for over 2 decades to lure women and girls into his orbit for sex, and with the help of his entourage. I think all of that is very accurate, all of that is very relevant, and I will speak about those things in this video. I think we'd all agree that it's a very good thing that this whole case has exposed his sexual assault and his harassment, in not just in this case, but in general, and it has increased the kind of scope of predatory men to be held responsible for their actions. So I think everybody's saying that's a good thing. But how did it all start? How did this recent wave start? Well, the New York Times and the New Yorker first published pieces that accused the disgruntled movie producer Harvey Weinstein of decades of sexual assault and harassment in 2017. And soon after that, Weinstein stood trial and was convicted of felony sex, crime and assault. And after the trial, Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance Jr. said in a statement in March 2020, and I quote, "We thank the court for imposing a sentence that puts sexual predators and abusive partners in all segments of society on notice. We thank the survivors for their remarkable statements today and indescribable courage over the last 2 years. Their words took down a predator and put him behind bars and gave hope to survivors of sexual violence all across the world." I think this is such a really concise, accurate and well said statement. It reflects my sentiments exactly. So why am I mentioning Weinstein's trial? Well, it's the whole conviction and sentencing sparked the global Me Too and Time Up movements across the industry, across Hollywood, with many actors, production staff and individuals coming forward to share their stories of alleged misconduct. Another big case, obviously, was the drugging and sexually assaulting women by Bill Cosby, who faced trial in 2017 and was subsequently convicted by the jury and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. And since his release, he needs to undergo lifetime counselling and appear on the sex offence registry. However, Cosby was released from a state prison in June 2021 when his conviction was overturned after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that he'd been denied his rights when providing self-incriminating evidence in a civil suit that was actually used later on to convict him in a criminal case. So just to be crystal clear, he was never found innocent. It's just basically the prosecutors messed up the evidence. And I have to say, this is shocking. It's frustrating because it's like a blow, in my opinion, to all the victims who were brave enough to speak out against him in the first place. Okay, so let's go back to R. Kelly. Why did it take him so long to be convicted? Well, R. Kelly's trial was like the culmination of decades of accusations pointing to a predator who was basically hiding in plain sight. In fact, rumours date back to almost the beginning of his career. He was a chart topper, a Grammy winner, an artist who filled arenas and collaborated with huge stars. And I have to say, I kind of love Remix to Ignition. It's the freaking weekend, baby, about to have me some fun. Bounce, bounce, bounce. I'm not sure about that verse. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Doesn't seem like a lot of thought was put into that. What I'm saying is a terrible, terrible guy, but it's a very catchy tune. So the point I'm trying to make is that these allegations, or at least the rumours or the sentiment about his actions, are not new. There are criminal details of his marriage to Aaliyah way back in 1994, when she was 15 and he was 27. And this was all detailed in open court during this trial. And it turned out that a former tour manager admitted that he bribed an official to get a fake ID in order for the ceremony to go ahead. And that's all kind of connected, I believe, in part of the reason why this abuse was allowed to go on and why it took so long for him to be held accountable for his actions. I'm going to come back onto that in a bit. Let me just finish with the background. So in 2002, Kelly was charged with 21 counts of making indecent images of children, and after years of delay to his trial, he was eventually acquitted. And then since then, claims have been made over the years and the victims have been silenced and the whole thing's been kind of swept under the rug by an industry that I believe just wanted to have the money rolling in. And also, I have to say that I think some of the fans are culpable because they just simply did not want to believe that R. Kelly could have committed the crimes that he was accused of. Now, to me, this is insane. How can anybody try and make that judgment from a distance? Just because you like somebody, that doesn't mean that you could possibly know what they're capable of, because people present themselves in, TV interviews or media outlets in a certain way, obviously. Like, there's a whole industry built behind images of celebrities. So to put this into context, I would say that people have literally lived next door or even married serial killers in the past and have been completely unaware of their crimes. Because some people who carry out these horrific kind of offences, they can be manipulative, they can be charming, they can be friendly. Jimmy Savile is a perfect example of this. Even though he was slightly odd and he was a bit quirky and creepy, he was absolutely adored by the UK. He was like a national treasure before his death. And I think, and I've said this in a previous video, that I think he was hiding in plain sight. He was using his oddness and his creepiness to kind of disguise some of his predatory actions. So people were just saying, oh, that's just Jimmy Savile. He's just a bit quirky. He's just a bit wacky. In fact, not only that, I would go one step further. I think Jimmy Savile used his charm. He used his empathy. He used his charity work, his benevolence for more opportunities to offend. Because think about it. It's the perfect cover for him to go to places where people are vulnerable, like charity gigs, hospitals, Broadmoor, prisons. So it just gives him another opportunity to find more victims and move on. He's like got not an alibi, but he's got a reason to visit these vulnerable people and move on. I discuss all of those issues in detail in my video about the psychoanalysis of Jimmy Savile. Go chickadee, check it out. Always be progging. So the point I'm trying to make is you can never tell what a person's like from afar, even sometimes from close up. In fact, there's even that well-known phrase, you should never judge a cook by its lover. So going back to R. Kelly, in the end, it was the documentary series Surviving R. Kelly, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. Tell me if you've seen it. Tell me what you think in the comment section below, which was released in 2019, that eventually led to the trial in New York in 2021. And ultimately, it led to R. Kelly to be found guilty of all 9 charges brought against him. So that's 1 charge of racketeering, 8 counts of violating a law which prohibits transporting people across state lines for prosecution. So once again, this obviously reminds me of Ghislaine Maxwell's case, because she was also done on the same kind of charges. She was also put on suicide watch. So as I said, I've done a video about that and a video about how she's going to cope with her 20-year prison sentence and how she'll be treated in prison, in my opinion, having worked as a psychiatrist in prisons before. So back to R. Kelly. He's now been sentenced to 30 years in prisons for those crimes, but he also faces another trial in Chicago in August. Okay, so that's all of the biggity background. Now for my psychoanalysis of R. Kelly, aka the money shot. What character traits drove him towards this horrific abuse? And also I'm gonna draw some parallels to other infamous predators as well. So the first thing is his own ego, his own narcissism, and his own entitlement. 3 different character traits, but all kind of intertwined in my opinion. Basically, I think, like a lot of really big celebrities, R. Kelly has been treated like a god for most of his adult life. He used to get mobbed everywhere he went. People would want selfies, would want his autograph. He'd be on TV shows. He was friends with other celebrities. And I have to say, he probably had numerous consensual sexual encounters. And I think that they, over time, would have led him to feel entitled. So he would have had the cognition, the thought process, I want sex. Any woman out there is there to please me. So this draws parallels to the words of my least favourite orange philosopher. If you grab them by the pussy, they let you. If you're famous, they let you do it. So obviously, not everybody who is famous acts in such a predatory way. I mean, you know, there's lots of men who are just all gentlemen who never abuse their power. There's Cliff Richard, Bruce Forsyth, Keanu Reeves, Rolf Harris, but they don't, you know, use their... What's that? Hello? Oh, really? Okay, I wasn't aware of that, thank you. So there's Cliff Richard, there's Bruce Forsyth, there's Keanu Reeves. So why is it that some do this and some men don't? Well, I think that's pretty simple. It's because of their internal moral compass. And that's related to early experiences throughout their childhood and adolescence, such as the template that their parents put down for them. And on top of all of that, I think it's due to their lack of ego. So those people that I mentioned are happy to be in a privileged position, but that's enough for them. They don't have this need to dominate their authority. So they have less narcissism and they're less egocentric. Another reason, I mean, yes, and this is sort of connected to those character traits, is that I think it was fed. The cycle continued because the industry allowed it to happen. They allowed this abuse to occur. They turned a blind eye. They even enabled it. So the producers, the promoters, the runners, the people in R. Kelly's camp who allowed this to go on were more interested in being aligned with the superstar and making money than in actually protecting the young girls. So what I'm trying to say is I think that he had this grandiosity. R. Kelly thought he was untouchable, but the industry has to take a proportion of that blame. But during that time, he was selling hundreds of millions of albums, of his own albums. He was producing from everyone from Whitney Houston to Celine Dion to Lady Gaga to Justin Bieber. So he was basically a cash machine for the music industry. I think they were all, well, not all, that's unfair, but I think a large proportion were aware of his behavior, but they didn't report it because simply he was making them money. Another issue is that I think that R. Kelly was an opportunistic predator, and you get this a lot in celebrity high-profile predators. So again, Jimmy Savile, perfect example of this. I already talked about that before. Another case that I've talked about recently was about a famous English DJ who actually tried to take down my video on YouTube, and I was sent a defamation email. So I'm not going to mention his name, but I will give you a clue. Let's just say he's got some, how do I put this, cultural identity issues. He's got maybe a race crisis, and he also speaks like this. I'm playing you the fat beats. Man sounds more like Ali G than actual Ali G, even though man's over 60. Wigger, please. So this DJ allegedly played on young black women who wanted to make it in the music industry. And I think R. Kelly did the same for some of his victims. He was surrounded by fans, some of whom were impressionable young women, some of whom also wanted to make it to the music industry. So he exploited that relationship and that opportunity. And the other thing that I think is relevant is grooming. So that is things like sex trafficking. I think that he desensitized his victims over time by making these false promises. By the way, I've done quite a few other videos related to this. I've talked about grooming in general, the signs, how you can keep your children safe. Talked about the huge scandal at Rotherham, possibly the biggest UK grooming scandal of all time. I will leave the links in the comment section. I also talked about Zara, Phythian, who's the actress from Doctor Strange. So she was a taekwondo teacher and she groomed a girl who I believe was 13 when she started. So that is a perfect example, a perfect parallel to think of a scenario where physical contact can be kind of normalized and increased over time. As well as all of those things, I think RKelly probably had other obvious character traits like a decrease in empathy, really warped morals. He was probably manipulative in charming to a degree, and I think he probably, to have such a huge ego, he must have at some point in his life had an inferiority complex, whatever that was, underappreciated by siblings, bullied at school. I don't know what it was, but I bet my psychiatrist salary that there is something in his background that would have explained all of this. Okay, moving on. Why did it take so long to get justice against RKelly? Before I continue, I'd just like to explain to you why I made this YouTube channel, Psych for Sore Minds. I want to give you my professional insights. I want to educate you because you're worth it. There's lots of true crime YouTube channels, but none that give you an insight into the inner workings of a forensic psychiatrist. I want you to start analysing and dissecting cases like a professional, both from the psychiatric and the legal perspective. I guess what I'm trying to say is I want you, yes you, to start thinking like me, start talking like me, start smelling like me, and if you're willing to brown up, even start looking like me. Go and check out my other videos. It's a smorgasbord of videos related to true crime with a sprinkling of mental illness. I won't go through all the topics, but I will leave some links in the comment section below. I implore you to subscribe to this channel. Not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it actually prevents you stepping in dog poo for the rest of your life, guaranteed, or your money back. Okay, so why did justice take so long? As I mentioned before, I think the industry allowed it to happen to a degree. It turned a blind eye. It enabled RKelly because he was milking their pocket. He was lining their pockets. So they were milking their cash cow. Cash cow. Yeah, they were milking their cash cow. Now, a lesser YouTuber might be tempted to make a joke here, but I don't think it would be amusing. Sorry, too soon. So Kenyette Tisha Barnes, the co-founder of the #MuteRKelly movement, which was launched in 2017 to make calls to boycott the singer's music and shows, said that they had to hold accountable, and I quote, they had to hold accountable those who allowed this behaviour to go on for so long. And the answer is simple, because these were young black girls from inner city Chicago. And I completely concur with this. I think the fact that they were young black girls, I mean, they were simply not believed. Women in general are often not believed about sexual abuse stories, but black girls in particular. So there might be an element of sort of slut shaming. The victims might assume that they won't be believed. Worse than that, they might even be targeted, especially on social media. So that's why it takes a lot of courage, a lot of bravery and time to step out, to stand up for yourself and to speak out. Sometimes it takes somebody else who's had a similar situation with that perpetrator to speak out first. Then the other victims think that they might, because they're not the only ones, they might be believed. So it gives them the inspiration to come out and speak out. On a side note, this it kind of connected to the credibility of victims. I think it's really relevant what the whole Amber Heard case, and particularly her closing remarks, and why they're so damaging. Because people might conflate an attention-seeking liar to actual victims. So specifically, Amber Heard said in her closing statements that she believes that Johnny Depp's power and influence affected the court case, rather than the fact that her evidence was about as believable as that Nigerian prince who keeps trying to give me his inheritance. I've actually done a whole video on Amber Heard and her closing statements. Go check it out. Always be plugging. Links in the comment section. So to conclude this episode, I hope that I've given you some insights into RKelly's case, some of the background. I've also mentioned some other landmark celebrity cases, including the one that sparked the Me Too movement. I've also tried to tell you about some of the psychological processes behind celebrities abusing their power. And as I said, there's so many cases recently. Jimmy Savile, Zara Phythian, the man who I cannot name due to defamation claims on YouTube. Let's call him Timmy Savile. And I've also hopefully given you some insights in why it takes so long to get justice. As my final comment, I just want to make this point. We really cannot forget the victims of all of this and the psychiatric consequences that they have. So as well as criminal cases, I do civil cases. I've carried out dozens, maybe even more than that, of cases where I've assessed people who have been sexually abused in childhood, and I've seen the psychiatric consequences. I'm not going to make any jokes about it because it ain't funny. Everything from anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, even non-mental illness, just maladaptive coping mechanisms and negative cognitive patterns, such as not trusting other people. If you have any experience of that kind of thing and you're willing to share, please let me know in the comments section. I would love to hear your stories. Okay, a couple of questions for you, my dear viewers, my Psych for Sore guys and gals. Did I miss out any relevant issues that you think I should have said in this in terms of RKelly's personality traits or social issues? And this is a serious question, I'm not taking the P. Am I still allowed to enjoy Remix to Ignition? So what I mean by that is it possible, do you think, to separate the talent or the art of a performer from the predatory behaviour? Is that fair? Or should it all be should it be cancelled fully, I guess is what I'm asking. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Finally, please tell more people about this channel. I'm a weak man, I need validation. Why won't you just love me? Stay euthymic, buy my book. Not only will it help educate you about the inner workings of a forensic psychiatrist and my most fascinating case, but more importantly, it will make me money. Only a tiny, tiny bit of money, negligible reading. If you can't read good, I've got a version out on audiobook. It's called In Two Minds. You can get it on Amazon, get it on Audible. Please subscribe, and whatever happens, do not forget, this is really important, do not forget, I love you.